Matt Monro in 1964 with his top 30 hit, Walk Away. It was an even bigger smash in his home country of Great Britain. You know, Matt Monro was one of those rare pop vocalists who found success on both sides of the Atlantic before the British invasion. Much of the reason for that success is certainly down to what the AllMusic website refers to as the easiest, most perfect baritone in the business. I first discovered Matt Monro's music on, of all things, a Peter Sellers comedy album. After that, I recognized his voice singing the main title theme to the James Bond film From Russia with Love. Well, we're still talking about James Bond today, and we're still talking about Matt Monro. His daughter, Michele Monro, oversees his musical legacy and has been keeping his name out there. And she's joining us today. We're very thrilled. Michele Monro, welcome to the show.
It's my pleasure, David.
Now, looking back at the timeline here, was your father already a celebrity when you were born?
Not really. I mean, when I was born, he just got a phone call to do his first ever jingle, which was for Camay. And that was really a little bit of the start of him stepping up, you know. But in fact, the album you mentioned, Peter Sellers, Mummy got a phone call from George Martin and said, listen, I'm doing an album with Peter Sellers and I want someone to lay down a track in the style of Sinatra. He didn't want an impression, but the way Sinatra might sing it. And Daddy didn't want to do it. He was like, oh, I'm good enough to emulate the best singer in the world, but not to have my own recording contract. But Mum talked him into it. And he went in, and it was a comedy album, which EMI was known for back then. And the track was called I'll Keep You Swinging, which was a spoof of Sinatra.
Delightful. I wish I could sing like that.
So Dad went in, he laid it down, and Peter Sellers listened back to it and said, I can't do that. Because although he was a great mimic, he didn't know how to do singing ones.
Right.
He said, let's use this guy, but we have to give him a pseudonym. So it was Fred Flange. And everybody, the public, the press, everyone went nuts saying, who is this guy? Is it Sinatra? You know, we want to know. You know, he was sort of in demand. And then George rang back a few weeks later and said, you know, should we make some music together? And then he signed. That was his big break.
And that was a very fruitful and long-lasting relationship with producer George Martin.
Yeah. And also, I don't think you'll be aware of this, but Daddy actually had a hit with Yesterday.
Yes.
And that was because in England, by law, by contractual law, the Beatles weren't allowed to bring out any single unless all four had performed on it. And they hadn't. So George Martin, who was a musical, for both of them, producer, said to Daddy, you release it. And Daddy went straight to number 8. So Daddy was very happy. But I don't think Paul McCartney or the others, but, you know, you can't have it all.
Right.
He was before the Beatles in England. George Martin had him for several years prior. And even when the Beatles came, and obviously attained superstardom, George kept Daddy on, you know, he didn't get rid of him. I mean, they did some amazing work together, so...
yes. Yeah, I love those recordings. I've always loved his versions of songs like Let's Face the Music and Dance, which is so hard-hitting, and then he'll have a gentle ballad. And I know that there are all these comparisons to other singers and Frank Sinatra and Tony Bennett and what have you, but they all were fans of your father.
Yeah.
So it was reciprocal.
Well, that's why I called the book that I wrote The Singer's Singer, because he got his tagline, because singers would come to hear him work. And in fact, the very first time Daddy worked at Talk of the Town in London, which is a very famous venue at the time, very prestigious. In fact, Tony Bennett and him were having a competition at who appeared there the most. It ended up as a tie with 8 times each. Very first time Daddy D was very nervous, and he did his first show. And after, the stage manager knocked on the door and said, Sammy Davis would like to come back and pay his respects. Is that okay? And Daddy very nonchalantly said, yeah, sure. He closed the door and he was jumping on the settee saying to Mum, oh my goodness, is that Sammy Davis wants to meet me? He was he couldn't believe that others wanted to meet him as much as he was a fan of theirs, you know.
So you were a young girl during this first full flush of success your father was experiencing, and children of famous people get asked this all the time, but were you aware, did you have an awareness that your father was this celebrated personality?
No, not really, because, I mean, Dad was away a lot. I mean, you had to go where the work took you because you didn't know if the phone was going to ring with any work, you know. And so it required him going overseas for nearly 9 months of a year. So I knew he was away a lot. When he was home, there was a house full of reporters, you know, wanting interviews. Johnny Spence and George Martin were there going over rehearsing. The house was always busy. And I didn't get it until, well, even when he did Eurovision Song Contest, I think I was about 5 or 6. Mummy was watching it on the television, and I couldn't understand why Dad was in the room but not there. Apparently, I left the room in disgust. So. It was only really when I went to see his first live show. I sat there, and it was deadly quiet suddenly. The overture started, the spotlights came on, and Dad walked onto the stage and got thunderous applause, and he hadn't opened his mouth. And I'm like, right. Oh, okay. By the end of it, I realized I'd literally been holding my breath all the way through, you know. And he had a fantastic ovation. And I was like, oh, my gosh, that's my dad.
I mentioned in the introduction that your father sang the theme to the James Bond film From Russia with Love, which is considered by James Bond aficionados as one of the greatest, if not the greatest, of the James Bond movies. Your father was the first singer to sing a James Bond theme. In Dr. No, it was just an instrumental, and that started that whole process, and it carries on to this day. But there's a great story about your mother and father sneaking into a movie theater and watching the James Bond film and not hearing your father sing the theme song. Can you tell us that?
Yeah, snuck into Paris to watch the film, because obviously you only go into a studio, music studio, to record. You don't see the film. So they crept in, and the film starts, and Dad's music isn't there. And my mum is apoplectic. I mean, she's like, where's the music? Where are you? What's happened? And Dad's trying to watch the film because he was not only a massive film buff, but, you know, it's James Bond, and
right.
It's thrilling for him. And then about 40 minutes into the movie, a little punt boat comes along the river, and James Bond is on the riverbank with the beautiful girl. And you can just hear on the transistor radio a few bars of From Russia with Love. And my mum's like, is that it? Is that it? You know, and of course, all was forgiven at the end. They took a very unprecedented step of using it as the closing credits. And so, yes, he started the tradition that still carries on. So we were very proud of that.
And it wasn't too long after that success that your family moved to California and your father started recording for Capitol Records.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, Nat King Cole passed away, and Sinatra had left Capitol to form his own record company, Reprise. So they had a big gap in their stable. So they took an unprecedented step of signing a British artist up. And yeah, he flew over. We all moved there. And he was there for quite some time. Not as long as they'd hoped, because he got very homesick. Mm. And to be honest, he didn't like the way they recorded and did business there. Everything was very rushed. Over here, he'd talk through with George Martin, what they were doing. George would come to the house with Johnny Spence, and they test run things. They decided what musicians they were going to have, where they were going to be placed. And so when they went in the studio, that's why Daddy got the nickname One Take Monro, because literally they'd go in and they'd lay it down straight away, because everybody knew their job role. But in America, everything was just rush, rush, rush. There was no thought to anything. And Dad recorded something like, 10 albums or whatever in like 9 years. Something crazy. I'd be lying if I said I couldn't remember, but it's silly numbers. And he just didn't like the way that they dealt with things. And so he came back and realized in retrospect it was a big mistake from a career point of view. which is why we went back there in the 80s and lived in Florida.
That was Matt Monro singing the theme song to the 1969 film The Italian Job, a song called On Days Like These. Our guest today on the program is Matt Monro's daughter, Michele Monro. And what exactly is your role today as the custodian of your father's musical legacy?
I run everything. And when my dad died, for instance, there wasn't CDs out, there wasn't DVDs out. So I've been responsible for transferring things. For instance, George Martin and Daddy and Johnny Spence, which was his musical director, used to go into Abbey Road for a session, and they would lay down maybe 5 or 6 tracks for a single, or maybe a couple of tracks for the album. So there'd be 4 or 5 extras that would go in the vault. And after Daddy died, I went to EMI and said, can I have a snoop? And I found nearly 500 tracks that had never been released. And I thought, oh, they're bound to be duffs or, mistakes or B-sides. And they weren't. They were things like New York, New York, Autumn Leaves and My Funny Valentine, things that people hadn't heard him sing before, but he'd actually recorded. So, in fact, we brought out a fantastic album called The Rare Monro. And EMI said to me, oh, it hasn't got Born Free on it. It won't sell. But we proved them wrong because it went gold in about 10 days. And then 5 years later, we did the Rarer Monro. So with those 2 albums alone, there are 110 tracks on it.
Wow.
Yeah.
And
so gradually we've done, Dad with Nelson Riddle. We've done live at the BBC. We've done a live concert in Australia. I mean, I did 66 CDs since he's passed away. And they're not best ofs or, which I don't like, to be honest. But we brought out one last year, and it's been 6 years since the release, called Stranger in Paradise, The Lost New York Sessions. Now, this took me 60 years to release as the way that Daddy intended. Now, he did it in New York, and he'd gone into the studio, and very unlike him, because he's known for big orchestras and bands that are sizable, he decided that he only wanted 5 musicians, with his voice the 6th instrumentalist. And he got exactly what he wanted, laid it down, went away, and he was working at the Plaza in New York and went off to work totally happy. Unbeknown to him, the producer, Dave Kavanagh, decided, no, he wanted the big sounds on it. So he dubbed brass and stuff on it and murdered it. And was so upset that it was shelved. And he refused to have anything to do with it. So I literally brought it out the way he wanted it to. And it went straight to number 8 in the proper charts here and was in the charts for 6 months last year. There's a track that he did called Hello, Dolly, which obviously from the stage show and the film are the same name. And I've always hated it because it's very brash and loud and theatrical. And then on this album comes the track Hello, Dolly with a 5-piece. And you need to listen to it, David. It's like a love song. It's a totally different feel. And I fell in love with the song because of it. And I was like, it's one of my favorites now. It's such a different feel. You honestly think that Dad is only singing to you. You feel as if he's only in the room with you. It's very intimate. And I did include a second CD of his hits, if you like, and his more notable recordings, because obviously in the time frame, we've got a lot of new fans that don't know maybe all those hits. So I thought, no, we'll couple it with that. But yeah, it was an amazing success because it's new material, And the same with DVDs, as I say, there was nothing on DVD before. So I did that. I've written the book. I work on the cruise ships doing talks on his life and music and how it impacts modern artists, So basically run it so that his name isn't forgotten. I'm trying to keep the legacy alive,
Where can people go to catch up with you and find out what will be happening in the future?
I've got the website I run, which is mattmonro.com. And in fact, everyone has always spelt our name wrong, either with a U or with an E at the end. And my dad used to say, it's very, very easy. It's Monro. It's an anagram of moron. So what I had to do is I had to buy all 3 names for the website.
Oh, wow.
Because I knew that the majority would spell it wrong. So, yeah, mattmonro.com is the main site, and we've launched his own YouTube channel, but you have to go to YouTube and type his name in to find it. And there's a book on his life called The Singer's Singer, which is quite an eye-opener, I think, because, you know, you ask people about Matt Monro and they'll say, oh, he's the singing bus driver, or oh, yeah, he did the Bond movie. And then they stop because they realise they don't really know too much else about him. So, yeah, I decided to release a book so that it gave everybody a real good overview of his life prior to becoming famous and then the aftermath.
Well, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show today. This has been a great discussion, a great excuse to play more Matt Monro music, which is always a good thing. Thanks for all that you do on behalf of your father's fans, and have a great rest of your day.
No, thanks, David. Have a good one.